Welcome to day 55 of our scripture reading and daily encouragement. Today we're going to cover Numbers chapters 30, 31, 32, and 33. Then we're going to jump over into Mark chapter 9 and finish that chapter with verses 30 through 50. And then we're going to cover Mark 10, verse 1 through 34. So quite a bit to cover today. I'm going to jump right in. But as we go into Numbers, I need to back up a little bit. Remember a few days ago, we had the story of where the Midianite women led the Israelite men into idolatry. They seduced them into having sex, and they led them into idolatry. So as we pick up here in Numbers, God is telling Moses, okay, you're going to go take revenge on these Midianites for leading my people into idolatry. And then, Moses, this is kind of your final mission. You will die after this. So I think it's interesting as the Israelites go to war against the Midianites, it's the priests that lead the charge. They blow the trumpets, they go in, they kill all the men. But Moses comes back and he's furious because they just killed the men. They were told to go in and destroy the people, and they didn't kill the women, and they were actually the ones that caused the sin. They were the ones that caused the idolatry. So Moses instructs him to go back and kill the women and children that were involved. And I know this sounds really harsh to us. I know it sounds really harsh for our time. But God was trying to remove the evil to protect his people. His people were to be set apart. And remember, there's things we've talked about. There's just a little yeast, it can ruin the whole dough. And God knew that, and he was trying to keep his people set apart by destroying all the evil. So I know it sounds harsh, and there are people that sometimes say things like, how could I serve a God who would punish these people? But they weren't innocent people, they were evil people. So we have to remember that. They were evil women and children that were leading the Israelites into sin. Satan was using these people to try to destroy God's chosen people, the people God had set apart. So God knew these people had to be destroyed. So we have to keep that in mind as we read through this. God is not a harsh God walking around wanting to destroy people, but he will destroy evil. And we should appreciate that. We should want him to destroy evil. Here's what's crazy. Not one Israelite was killed or went missing in that battle. And that right there should have shown the Israelites how much God was on their side. They didn't even do it right, but they still found favor. Then we see two tribes come to Moses, and they're like, hey, we want to set up our permanent camp on the east side of the Jordan. So remember, on the west side of the Jordan is the promised land. So the Jordan River is the boundary. When they cross the Jordan River, they're going into the promised land. And these two tribes say, we just want to stay on the east side. It's beautiful land. It's great for our flocks. And Moses warned them, don't do this. This is what your ancestors wanted or did. They refused to go to the promised land. They were scared to go. And it caused everyone to have to wander in the wilderness. So Moses reminds them of what happened to their ancestors and how it angered God. And he says, this is going to anger God. But these two tribes say, no, we agree. We'll fight. We'll help the Israelites we'll help all the tribes take the promised land. But we want to return and settle back out of the promised land. And if you look at this, this is crazy. But isn't it like us sometimes? God gives us a promise, and sometimes we refuse to accept that promise. Maybe we don't feel good enough. Sometimes we'll even help others get to their promise. So think about that. These tribes were willing to help the others get to their promise, but then they wanted to settle back. And sometimes it's what we do. We refuse the promises God has for us, but we'll help others get to their promise, and then we'll settle back. So I want you to be encouraged today or challenged. Don't settle. If God has a promise for you, go after it. I know it's unknown territory. It was unknown territory for them, but don't settle on what's okay now and give up the promises God has for you. As we transition over into Mark, this is action-packed, so we're going to dive into it. We start with a similar story that we saw in Matthew. The disciples are arguing about who will be the greatest in the kingdom. And when Jesus questions them, they're scared to even say anything because they don't want him to know. But of course, he knows what they're thinking. And Jesus says, if you want to be first in the kingdom, be last now and be a servant. That's a complete sermon right there. You want to be first in the kingdom? You want to be first in the eternal kingdom? Be a servant now. Be last. He also talks in this chapter about coming to him with the faith of a child. See, that's the simple formula. Be a servant with childlike faith. Quit trying to figure everything out. We're always trying to figure everything out and wrap our minds around it, and we complicate things. Come to him with childlike faith and be a servant. And you will be first in the kingdom. You will be the greatest in the kingdom. That's our simple formula, guys. But too many times we want to lead people. We want to be the one in charge. We want to have everything figured out. That's what the world teaches us, and Jesus is saying, don't do that. Don't try to figure everything out. Childlike faith. Be a servant. Serve the people. Be last now, and your reward will be being the greatest later. We have to get our arms around that. And then he talks about, if you cause one of my little ones who trust in me to sin, it would be better for you to be thrown into the sea with a huge weight tied around your neck. In other words, don't cause my little ones to sin. Then he says, get rid of what causes your sin. And he gives a couple of analogies. And I think he's being a little extreme here to get your attention. But he says, if your hand's causing sin, cut your hand off. It's better to go to heaven with one hand than hell with two hands. If your foot's causing sin, cut your foot off. Better for you to go to heaven with one foot than hell with 2 feet. If your eye's causing sin, gouge your eye out. Better you go to heaven with one eye or no eyes than to go to hell with 2 eyes. Maybe for us, it's not a hand, a foot, or an eye. Maybe it's that radio station you listen to that feeds negative stuff into your soul. Maybe it's an idol of a thing, a car, or something we're wanting to buy, or we have saved up our money to buy. Or maybe it's something else that we put before God. But what Jesus is saying, if there's something in your life that's causing sin, get rid of it. It's not worth it. And then he says, everyone will be tested by fire. Here we go with that sales pitch again. You want to follow me? You're going to be tested by fire. But fire purifies. It's just like when gold has to be put through fire to get the impurities out, to purify it into pure gold. Then we see the Pharisees. They're trying to trap him again. Hey, Jesus, should a man be allowed to divorce his wife? Jesus, once again, answers a question with a question. What did Moses say? He permitted it in the law. And Jesus says, yes, he permitted it because your hearts are hard. But I say, since they are no longer two but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. I want you to hear that if you are married, or if you're not married, but you're likely to be married one day. Jesus' goal, our Father's goal, is that any marriage that comes together under him would never be split apart. Let no one split apart what God has joined together. The two have become one. Now let nothing split that apart. So if you are married or you're going to be married, remember this for the future. You need to hear this and you need to fight for your marriage. You need to do whatever it takes to make sure that your marriage doesn't fail. Then we hear the story of the rich man again, and we covered this in Matthew, but I'm going to hit it quickly again. The rich man says, what do I need to do to enter the kingdom? Jesus says, obey the 10 commandments. I've done all that, Jesus. And it says Jesus felt genuine love for him. He felt compassion for him. And Jesus says, there's still one thing you haven't done. There's still one thing you haven't done. Go and sell all your possessions and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. So Jesus is saying, for you've got to give up everything. And it says the man went away sad. One translation says dejected, for he had many possessions. And basically, that man chose his possessions over following Jesus. Now, we don't need to take this to the extreme that Jesus is telling us that all of us have to be poor, but Jesus is saying, in your heart, to follow me, you have to be willing to give up. You have to be willing to give up. He says, anyone who gives up stuff, anyone who gives up relationships to follow him will receive 100 times as much. But you'll also see persecution. I'm going to read verse 31. He said, but many who are the greatest now will be the least important then. And those who seem least now will be the greatest then. See, he's just reiterating in a different way what he's already said. Many who are the greatest now in the world will be the least important in heaven, in eternity. But many who are the least now will be the greatest. It's just a restatement of what he said earlier. You want to be the greatest? Be the lowest now and serve. You want to be the greatest? Be the least important now here on earth. It's backwards of what the world says. So I know this was a lot today, but I'm going to kind of recap. Be obedient and accept the promises God has for you. Don't settle when there's more for you in the kingdom. Be a servant and come to him like a child with childlike faith. Don't harm others. Don't cause them to sin. Don't lead them into sin. Get rid of what causes your sin. Don't let anything destroy your marriage. Be willing to give up your stuff, your relationships, to follow Jesus, and you will get a reward of better things and better relationships. The least now will be the greatest. But there is a warning here. You will be persecuted. There is a cost. But what's our reward, guys? Our reward is eternal life with Jesus in perfection, in heaven, in paradise. So I know this was a lot of data today, but I hope you'll absorb it, and I hope you'll be encouraged, and I hope you'll have a great day.